I didn't really used to think that there was anything particularly recognizable about my music style. I always thought that I was one of those musicians that people would make their criticisms of they always make the same song every time. And to some extent, I still kind of think that. However, more recently, a lot of people have been saying that one of the elements of my music that they're the most fond of is my way of writing pianos. Now, this may come as a shock to you considering the fact that this is a tutorial video and that I have a whole playlist that's dedicated to tutorials, but I'm not really the best with explaining things. However, a while back I recorded a small video for my friend Sky High Productions, which goes into my process of how I go about writing pianos for my songs. So I figured that it would be worth it to show you guys how I do that as well. This is going to be a lot different from my usual tutorial videos, seeing as this one isn't Friday Night Funkin' specific, so I know seeing that a lot of people are probably going to click off. However, if you do want to see more videos like this that just give more general songwriting tips, then please let me know down in the comments. Alright, enough yapping. Let's get on to the tutorial. First of all, before we get into all the fancy stuff, we obviously have to write the chords first. Here's something quick I wrote in the key of G sharp minor. Next up is mapping out the beat of your chords. How you do this is depending on the vibe of the song that you're going for. So there are typically two ways I go about this. The first way is arpeggiation. In this way, you're not playing all of the notes of the chord at the same time. Rather, you're doing it in a sequence. It doesn't strictly have to be one note after another either. As in, you don't have to play all of the notes of the chord in order. Just as long as all the notes in your arpeggio are in the same key, it should work just fine. I typically use this method when it comes to doing more slower, more somber songs. Here's an example of this. Next, let's get into what I like to call chopping. This is the method of writing pianos that I tend to use the most, which is most prominent in my song No Pressure.temp that I did for Flavor Rave. Going back to our original chord pattern, if you hit Control A or Command A if you're using a Mac, it'll highlight and select everything. Doing this, you'll be able to adjust the length of all of your notes simultaneously. From then, you can copy and paste the chords until you get the kind of beat that you're going for. How you do this will depend on how bouncy you want your song to sound. If you need to, you can adjust the position of some of the chords as well. Again, here's an example. So that's just ways of doing chords. There are definitely ways we could spice this up, yeah? Let's talk about filling the gaps. When you use the chopping method, you can see that there's a lot of dead space between where the first chord ends and the next one starts. So to keep things more interesting, I usually like to fill in those spaces with notes that are part of the same scale. There's a bit of a negative connotation within songwriting that repetition is boring. So keeping the same chords while adding these small variations can help to make things sound more interesting. Next, we can get into adding bass notes. Finding your bass notes is pretty simple. It'll usually be the first note in your chord, or the root note. What I usually do is copy and paste them an octave lower. Then I use the same chopping method that you use for the chords, while adding some variation to keep things interesting. Again, this will depend on what the vibe of your song is. I typically tend to lean more towards things that are more groovy and funky. Another small thing you can do is add passing chords. These are chords that will help more better transition into the next one. Take this one here for example. It's in key, yes, but it's the same chord as the one before that. Nothing changes except what the current root note is. So by switching up the chord, it adds a little bit more pizzazz. An alternative method to writing melodies in your pianos is called toplining. It's a similar method to filling in the gaps like I mentioned earlier, but on a higher end. Firstly, let's remove the gaps I filled earlier. So now it's just the chords and the bass. Again, like earlier, we'll fill in those empty spaces with notes that are in the same key, but we're just doing it on the higher part of the piano. A good tip when it comes to this is note length. The length of the note that you use in your melodies will help things sound more punchy and emphasize certain points. So there's a lot of variety you can add just by messing with simple chords. I'd also like to mention that this method of writing isn't constricted to just pianos. If you take apart the certain elements, like bass, chords, and the melody, you can put those on different instruments, and it'll help to better structure your song. See? Now it's technically an FNF video, so you can't click off.
Don't die, that shit kills you.